Why did past treatment approaches to Alzheimer's fail for so long?
Yeah, when we think about the pharmaceutical approaches to this, there's a long story, and it's very well documented in a book by a gentleman named Carl Harroup. It's called How Not to Study a Disease, The Story of Alzheimer's. And, being the Alzheimer's nerd I am, I like read it on one plane ride and was so fired up because it made me mad, right? It's like the scientific method is supposed to be about proving not proving that something's right, but proving that something isn't right, right? Like there's a null hypothesis. And so you're constantly in this sort of skepticism, right? That as a good scientist, you're constantly saying, are the assumptions I'm making accurate? Are they true? Or is there something else that might explain this? And what we've seen over and over again is sort of the opposite of that, is that we've doubled down as a society, scientists, taxpayer dollars have gone into this amyloid plaque hypothesis. And that for good reason, is now being called into question. And there's a handful of things that have come up. One, amyloid as the cause of Alzheimer's it really narrows our part of it is there's so many directions to go in this and it's very complex, but part of it is this desire to take this reductionistic approach and to simplify things, right? It's our human desire to find certainty, to make it simple, especially in the face of such a scary disease. We
Yeah.
want to find this single molecule intervention because that's what's incentivized in the pharmaceutical world, right?
Yeah.
If we can find a single molecule that we can then patent, that we can turn into a medication, that a doctor can prescribe in the 7-minute visit that they have, that you can go to the pharmacy and buy it, and the pharmaceutical company can get their return on the investment that they put into all of the drug trials. That's the model that we're set up for, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, even though we wanted to fit Alzheimer's into that box, it doesn't. It's a very complex disease with multiple reasons for why our brains degenerate. And so, what we really need is an intervention that matches the complexity of that disease process.
Yeah.
And that is what Dr. Bredesen describes. It's what functional medicine describes. It's what Dr. David Perlmutter describes. I'm kind of on the high of coming off where it's Monday morning, and I just spent all weekend with them at the Thought Leaders Conference. And I just feel so inspired by the work that they're doing. Jeff Bland was there, and he is the godfather of functional
Yeah.
medicine. And we dove deep, and there were a lot of these reminders of like, hey, we were talking about this in the 80s. We were talking about this in the late 70s. And sure enough, as the science has progressed, what we see over and over again is that the explanation is complex. It's
Yeah.
complex system science. And when we apply that to our interventions, we see the best outcomes in the literature.
Yeah.
So, why has this not worked? Right now, we're talking about a lot of people are talking about the new blockbuster drugs for Alzheimer's. They are these antibody therapies that go after amyloid, that take the amyloid out of the brain. And there was a really scary New York Times article last week about just how dangerous these medications can be. Not only do you not get an improvement in cognition, which when I say the word Alzheimer's, this word really has been used for marketing purposes, and like for many, many years, because it puts the fear of God in you, right? Like you think of that person that you've met who's lost their dignity, their ability to go to the bathroom on their own, their ability to live independently, their ability to drive, their ability to put sentences together, to remember the names of their loved ones.
Yeah.
And that it's heartbreaking,
Yeah.
not just for that person, but for everyone around them who loves them.
Yeah.
And that's Alzheimer's, right? The beta, that person, their family, they don't care the number of amyloid, the amount of amyloid in their brain. What they
Yeah.
care about is their ability to live life.
That's right.
And that is measured in cognition,
Yeah.
right? That is measured, and there's blunt instruments for this, and there's very fine-tuned
Yeah.
instruments for this. But when we look at these blockbuster amyloid antibody drugs, what we see is that they don't enhance cognition. You don't improve cognition. What
Yeah.
you do is you get rid of amyloid
Yeah.
and you get worse more slowly, maybe for
Maybe.
some people.
Yeah.
And the risk there is one, it's very costly, and two, there's a risk of brain bleeding and brain swelling.
Yeah.
And the risk is highest for people who are ApoE4 positive, who have the highest risk for developing dementia. They're
Sure.
the ones with the highest risk of being harmed by these medications.
Yeah.
And so a recent new analysis just last week, in late October of 2024, showed that there's a 3 to 4-fold risk of death after
Mhm.
these medications are used. And what we also see is that on imaging, the brains atrophy. They get smaller very quickly on these medications.
Yeah.
And Dr. George Perry, the chief editor at the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, was quoted in the New York Times last week saying, we don't know
Yeah.
of uh, an indication that that is good for anyone, that a
Yeah.
shrinking brain is going to help anyone out, especially cognitively.
Yeah.
And so it really feels like depressing in some ways, but
Mhm.
also it's so laughable. It's so like just weird
Mhm.
that it's
Yeah.
like, okay, now there's this opening.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
this opportunity to be like, okay, what can fit into this huge
Yeah.
gap
Yeah.
that we need to
Yeah.
fill because so many people are suffering with dementia and Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And when we apply complex system science approaches,
Yeah.
it's really common sense, just uncommon practice. When we apply that to brain health,
Yeah.
we see better outcomes.